Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about what you're doing wrong in your pursuit of high-performance teams, and joining us to contribute to the conversation is Carla Fowler. Welcome, Carla.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I'm glad you could be here. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm doing now is that I run and founded about 10 years ago an elite executive coaching firm where I work one-on-one with leaders who are pursuing ambitious goals for themselves, for their companies and organizations. And I help them use performance science and all the best ideas we have from that space so they can get the benefit of that and those insights as they're working towards their goals. So that's what I've been doing for the past 10 years. Prior to that, I actually came into the coaching field from a background in medicine and science. So I'm trained as a physician, as an MD, but I also spent a good chunk of time working in science and literally like doing the lab research, got my PhD. And it's interesting. While those things might seem unrelated to what I'm doing now, there are a lot of approaches and mindsets that I found were very helpful and really like ported into and helped me design the methodology that I'm using today in my coaching. So that's probably a longer story than we want to delve into, but that's how I got to be doing what I'm doing now.
Excellent. So let's start off like explaining what do you mean by performance science? Because I'm sure some people haven't heard about that term before.
That's a great place to start. And the word performance gets thrown around a lot. So the way I think about performance science is as a multidisciplinary field, which includes everyone who is interested in thinking about how is it that human beings generate, their best results at the things they're pursuing. And that obviously has different components. So I would say the roots of the field really come from athletics. So thinking very much about physical performance. And as we now know, things we used to think were purely physical obviously have large mental components to them as well. Lots of athletes are working on their mental game, so to speak. And I think we also learned that there was a lot that could inform pursuits that really we thought of as entirely mental. So the field gradually began to find its usefulness in places like the operating room or the military or the cockpit. And then, of course, like moved fully into the business community as well. Because when we think about building a company or an organization, we have to think about how do you make decisions? How do you deal with risk? How do you compete in an environment where there are plenty of other people who would like to win your market share? And, to sort of quote your podcast, how do you keep your company from having a mortal event? So at any rate, that is what performance science is as a field. And it has contributors from, the best business or strategic thinkers. It has contributions from sociology and psychology. So, as human beings, how do we behave? And, and then there's obviously sort of physiology and some of the more biological elements as well. So that's how I think about it as a multidisciplinary field.
So when you're talking, I was thinking about like the SEALs, and I've read David Goggins' book recently, and so I think about what he had to go through as a SEAL, and there was a lot of obviously heavy amount of physical side of things, but there was also mental preparedness for being trapped in as a POC or POW, and how do you mentally prepare for that? And then there's the mental work they do to work as a team and work as one unit and all dependent on each other. There's probably nutritional aspects to it. So are you saying that all of those physical, psychological, physiological all go into even are relatable to business performance?
I think they are. Now, the degree to which different people can think and work on those things, obviously we often go to different providers to think about that. When we think about our health, we often say, well, like I go to the doctor sometimes and, and I think a little bit about my physical state. Maybe you go see a trainer or something like that. But one of the interesting things that seems more clear now than it once was is that like our brains and our bodies are not separate systems. They are one system, and things that we thought were all about maybe the below the neck piece of us absolutely are impacting our brain. So, if we if we have not eaten for 10 hours, our brain is not going to perform as well, and how we make decisions may be a little bit different. And we also know that it really takes a good amount of energy to do our best thinking. So, like if we're not sleeping well, so I think these things are very related. And, but also there's a number of things, even if we just say like, okay, that's related. If we actually even look at how we can learn about our thought processes and how we can perform better, even if we just are solely looking kind of at some of the more mental or thought performance realms. So it's a great question. And you can look at that performance from lots of different angles.
So when you have somebody who comes to you and says, I want to be an elite, business executive, what are some of the things you're looking at within their, within what they're doing currently, and kind of like, what's your process of evaluating where they are?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and this actually leads very well, I think, into some of the things that can go wrong. So one way to just start the whole process, and this is how I start my coaching, is to really do an in-depth, it's a conversation, but you could also say it's a bit of an assessment of what's going really right, like what's not going well. But perhaps even more importantly, I use that time as I'm beginning to work with someone. And specifically what I mean is I onboard every client with a 5-hour session. We take some breaks. We don't talk for the full 5 hours, but we really use it to dive into a couple different themes that all relate back to clarity. And the reason I start with clarity is because when you start to look at companies and like what's going well and what is also not going well, I find that there are a whole root of things, or a whole number of things, that will come back to lack of clarity. I think the lack of clarity about what are the objectives. So what are our goals, and what are the teams working towards? And then the second thing is, given those goals, what is really most important, or what are the biggest drivers of success towards those? So not like what's everything we could be doing, but literally like when we are making tough decisions about resources, what do we know we must invest time and resources in, because those are the things that actually give us the biggest ROI or the biggest impact towards where we want to go. And so we want to put our best time and resources towards those. And so with the individual, this is how I start, but I love hearing from them about what starts to happen out with their teams, like after we've had this conversation. So we start and we talk for 5 hours. It's a conversation. Actually, people are sometimes a little nervous coming into it. They're like, 5 hours on Zoom, that's a lot. But they actually say it flies by, like repeatedly. And what they emerge with is a framework we've built that has more clear statements about what really is the objective, or what are their goals, as well as what do we think are those root levers that are really going to get them there. And so just as a story to say, what are the surprising effects when they take this out? So I was working with a CEO of a nonprofit, and we did this session. They had their framework and they brought it back to their team and showed it to their team, started walking through it just so that they would understand his thinking. And his team was like, this is amazing. We see like where we fit. So like different people and different teams were like, oh, like that priority, that is all about us. Like we own that. And we also understand much better, like how you're thinking about things. And so we understand how we can contribute. And like how we're going to win as a team. And so this story was so interesting to me. It was early in my coaching practice. And of course, I had not come in and worked with the team at all. I just worked with their leader, but the impact of mental clarity translating into spoken clarity with a team, and then how motivated they became, really made this connection between clarity and, like, again, teams being motivated, teams being aligned and working together, and more or less like them being able to like see the field as the leader sees the field, certainly give feedback if they disagree, if they see something the leader's not seeing, right? That's a great opportunity for that. But also then they know how they can contribute. And I think that is one of the pieces at the root of wanting your employees, wanting, everyone who works for your company to really feel involved and to feel like they're winning. So that's your question about like, how do we start, actually really links to something that I think is a important, but also wonderful place to start in companies as you're trying to understand, like, okay, like if people aren't motivated or things are feeling a little flat, ask about clarity. Like, go down the chain of leaders. How clear is everybody? And how clear are their teams?
One of, you're talking about when you mention clarity, one of the, some of the leaders that I follow talk about lack of clarity is actually the biggest inhibitor to getting results. So what do you think some of those contributors are to lack of clarity, and how do you move to a more clear state?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One is just sometimes the assumption that the goal is obvious. Like, hey, we want to grow. And like, that's great. Okay, we know the direction you want to go in. But one of the challenges is that there can often be a moving goalpost phenomenon where even if things are going really well, the team hit what might have been the goal, but like, if it wasn't stated and if it wasn't recognized when it happened, and it's like, well, we're just trying to grow as much as possible this year, there isn't really a moment to recognize, again, which is a big piece of like motivating folks and teams. So that's one thing that can contribute. Another piece that can contribute is just a sense of like, not making it explicit. Like sometimes it's just not communicated. So like it might be explicit in a leader's brain, but it has never been mapped out like in a visual to the team. And then I think a third piece is that getting to clarity takes work and time, and it often gets mistaken for, well, that's thinking, that's not doing. We need to get to the doing of something. And since I know we want to grow anyways, like, let's just get to the doing of the growing. But I believe that the translation into clear objectives or goals, as well as the thinking behind and the translation of, what really is most important around the how that we're going to use, is the work. That is where the work starts. But it often feels like this thing that we want to skip over because we can already see some low-hanging fruit of the doing that we might do. But we learn so much as we try to put words and concreteness to an idea in our head or a dream in our head. And we have to make time for that. And I think for busy leaders, of course, I think almost every executive I talk to has a calendar problem. And so it becomes hard or even indulgent feeling to say, I need time to think. And I think it's really important.
Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting, the time to think piece, because I think a lot of us probably do measure our productivity by how many meetings are on the calendar or how many things are checked off the checklist. And I suppose you could put thinking on the checklist, but how important is that, whether it's journaling or, reading or just sitting. And, one of the things I find that if I take a walk on the beach, that so oftentimes I'll listen to a podcast, but then maybe even pause it, and just that movement where I can't be on, shouldn't be on the phone typing or whatever. Things come to me. Like, talk to me a little bit about that, like, those processes, or what people should be doing to be giving them space. What does that space look like? Is it meditation? Is it doing nothing? Is it, like, what does that look like?
That's a great question. I think when I'm talking about thinking, I am talking about something really specific. So meditation is wonderful. And so I'm not saying one should not do that, but I think it's really important to have time where you're in a quiet space. Or like, if you're a person who likes music, that's great too. But I think the point is you're not getting interrupted, and where you've blocked some time that is not for doing the work, and it's not for checking email. And so usually I recommend like have those things closed so they're not visually apparent and there's no like sound interruptions, where, and I recommend early in the day, but actually, frankly, do it anytime you can like create this scenario for yourself. So I think there's, sometimes people talk about like their perfect morning ritual. And I'm telling you, like, real life executives, like, I don't find that that's the norm, but I find they can create really effective moments of thinking for themselves, and they can be creative about it, and you make it work. And it does not have to be like after this perfect morning ritual for it to be effective. Like, I even find a focused 10 minutes before a meeting starts is like, as long as you are not doing anything else and you give yourself some time to orient about, this is like a microcosm, right? Of what do you want out of the meeting, right? Like, what's the goal of the meeting? And even what's most important, like to either be communicated or information to get, or people to connect or have dialogue. You can think about both what's the goal and what do I think is going to be most important for me to do to have that happen. You can even do that in 5 minutes, assuming you're not trying to do anything else, and just jot it down like on a Post-it pad or something. But just 3 things, like, all right, here's the 3 important things I really need to focus on during this meeting. I find punches well above its weight. So generally speaking, uninterrupted time, protect it. So like the other people around you know that like they shouldn't, not coming in or giving that time away. And then I find it's often helpful to have a prompt of some kind. And so you can have a little running list of prompts that are at different scales. So like one prompt could be, what is most important this year, like in terms of what we're accomplishing? So it could be broad scale, right? And, what do I still agree that the priorities that we thought were most important, are they still the case? Has the landscape changed such that that is not the case? And another prompt could be, hey, like this week, for example, what do I feel like is most important that I want to accomplish this week, or that we need to accomplish this week? Another prompt could be, what's my assessment of how things are going? Do I feel like we're on plan? Do I feel like we're not on plan? Another prompt could be, particularly if some crisis has come up or there's been some major change or shift, then looking at like, hey, I want 20 minutes to think about, what does this mean for us? What's a worst case? What's a best case? What are the uncertainties involved? And, how might we approach those? How might we think about what we want to try, or how we might manage those? So again, these are just some ideas of different kinds of prompts to help you get started. So you're just not just staring at the blank page. And then it's a practice skill. So I find people get more effective at it as they just get used to the ritual. And if you have a day where it's like not super productive, the point is like, just, did you sit down? Did you try and work on it? Did you not succumb to like, I'm just going to check my email? Okay, great. Like, keep it up.
Do you find people go to the opposite extreme where all they do is think, and then rather than and maybe they don't execute, or maybe it doesn't happen at that executive leadership level? I don't know, but I definitely see it with individuals in my life in general. They just rather think about it all day, and they never actually do.
This Yes. I mean, we exist on this spectrum,
Mm,
right? And I like one flavor of this is I need to know it all before I go at all. So like for some people, particularly if they're heading into something that feels uncertain, um, and this is actually something, again, this relates back to another problem that can pop up, I think, in corporations, which is this idea of we are in the middle of a lot of change. And I think that can create fear, like, or, smaller versions of fear. We might not think of it like how scared we are if, something life threatening is happening. But I think, with everything happening with AI, again, what's happening in the economy, there are a lot of things that are changing fast and do promote a sense of fear around people's security. And even outside of this current moment in time, I think whenever things are changing, or even just with the growth of a company, people experience uncertainty.
mm,
Teams and leaders experience uncertainty. And so, one of the things that I think performance science really has to help us with, and so this is another one of my principles that I talk with people about, is this idea of learning to relish uncertainty.
mm,
And what I mean by that is that it's a perspective and we have to practice it because as human beings, we like to feel in control. And we often equate things that feel uncertain with being risky, which really isn't totally the case. Something is like risky when it's both uncertain and maybe the downside or the likelihood of a bad catastrophic outcome is really high. And
mm.
we're worried about that. But the idea of relishing uncertainty is a perspective to say, actually, uncertainty is what brings opportunity to our companies. And it's also something that keeps us healthy. What I mean is that keeps us growing and it keeps us from stagnating. And I actually find that when people are at an equilibrium of they are growing, they are learning and seeing that they can adapt to change. Like when something unexpected happens, they see that they can cope with it. That's actually a place when human beings are in a good spot. Because again, sometimes if things are going really well for a long time and we haven't been forced to adapt or forced to grow in any way, there's actually like a sneaking insecurity that kind of comes in. This can happen both.
When's the other shoe gonna drop type thing? Like,
Yeah.
this
Well,
can't
and
keep
it's both
going
for
well. When is it gonna finally go wrong?
yeah, but also like if we haven't been growing, like we are rusty, like our growth muscles and our agility are not what they would if we're using them as we're going along. And so I bring this up because I think leaders actually can help their teams in really safe settings, like engage with uncertainty in what they're working on in ways that then help them. Again, if a company crisis actually arises, like a true crisis,
Mm,
people are a little more ready for it. I mean, perhaps a small version of, when you brought up the SEALs and how they train, how they have to train to, again, be ready when things are really, really tough. And so I love this idea of, can you help your team learn to approach uncertainty, learn to understand how they engage with it? And one of the best tools I've found for this is this idea of running good experiments. So
mm,
this is kind of back from my scientist days, because it occurred to me as I was getting into coaching that as a scientist, it was like normal. And I'm not saying it was comfortable, but it was normal that you walked into work every day and like you didn't know the answer. Like the whole reason you had a job was because you didn't know the answer and your job was to figure out how to learn something that nobody knew. And so you were sort of practicing this relishing uncertainty and running experiments like as a piece of your job. And I find that we can absolutely bring this idea of run a good experiment into the workplace that's a non-scientific workplace. So, and part of it is how you talk with your teams about like something that's uncertain, right? Like maybe you're thinking about, okay, where do we want to invest our time and energy as a bet to, increase our market share, for example? How do we want to do that? And helping your team walk through a process where maybe you generate ideas about how you could test test your bets, and even run smaller forms of them that would be less costly to whatever, gather customer data, just test the waters, see if you've got product market fit, and really help them start to think about like, it's okay to go out and run one of those tests and have it not confirm your hypothesis. Like maybe you thought like, okay, this customer group is going to be gold for us. And you go out and it turns out they're really not interested. Learning to know that that is an important answer, like that moves you forwards, even though it wasn't a positive answer, like it didn't sort of point you in the direction, pointed you away from that direction, or said, we can still go in that direction, but we need to think a little harder about, some other element of it and kind of break that down. But that's how I think about running experiments and what role that can play in, again, like alleviating fear in the workplace.
Yeah, I actually one of the people I follow talk about I really like it. It's like when you're trying to solve problems, or it's same thing that you're like along the lines you're saying is you can, list all the ways that you might be able to solve the problem. So like we need to increase sales by 5% in the next 3 months. And what are all the things that could drive it? And then you evaluate it against the criteria and you rank them. And then just like you said, you start doing small tests. You test the first one and you get, measured feedback or the metrics tell you whether you're on target or off target. And if that doesn't work, you switch to the next thing or you iterate in that. Just like you said, making those small investments to the change before you go all in on it can be a huge difference and how you expend your energy and actually make a difference into whatever problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I like it. Yeah, small tests, and letting even your team decide what some of those tests should be, like giving them some autonomy to suggest, so that they really get to participate in the process and start to hold some of that uncertainty and get comfortable with it. To say like, I propose this, I'm going to go test it. I'm going to report back to the group, and it will we will learn something if we've designed it. And the key is just to design it so you can learn something, positive or negative. You can come back smarter than you left.
I'd like to pivot just a little bit and talk, around the other aspects of things. So we hear a lot about, some of these, again, you got Tony Robbins and I can't think of who else, but, a lot of these high performance leaders, and, they are very much all in on like exercise and eating healthy. And so let's talk a little bit like, what are your thoughts on how does this impact high performance?
I think it does impact it. And again, there are a number of kind of health coaches or nutritional coaches out there. I will say like, this is, I think about this a lot for my own life, less in consultation with my clients. So I definitely have folks that I listen to and learn from, certainly like Peter Attia and his podcast. I found very useful on some of those fronts, but generally what I would say is, my number one is like asking about sleep, like getting enough sleep. And one of the interesting things is sometimes people will say, I don't have time to get more sleep. The work is taking up so much time, or it is other life stuff, that is important, right? Trying to fit it all in. And the thing I always suggest is I say, okay, we need to run the experiment where whatever we need to do to make it happen, to get you more sleep for a couple of days, because, and then let's see how much time the work is taking. Because I think we often get stuck in a chicken or an egg where the work is taking too much time. So we sleep less, which again, puts our brains at a detriment. And so we probably take more time to deal with things, or sometimes because we're underslept, like we don't handle things as well. And then we sort of create small other micro problems for ourselves. Like we lose our patience in a meeting and then there's some cleanup to do from that, right? Like, or we forget something important. And so then we have to like follow up the meeting and say, oh, by the way, there was something else we needed to talk about. So those are just silly examples, but I think we often have more ability to take a breath in the moment and say, what's really necessary here in this situation? What really does need to get done if we actually have had enough sleep? So I think that's definitely one of my big priorities. In terms of eating and nutrition, there are so many camps on that one. I'm not going to touch that one because I will insult someone's philosophy.
No, but I guess it's more, have you seen, not maybe a specific one, but have you seen sort of a tie versus, I know like when I'm in that, I've got to just get stuff done. Like I live off of, Coke Zero and ramen noodles and like whatever takes 5 minutes to eat. But is that really, does that type of nutrition actually impact our ability to have high mental performance or high even emotional performance, right? And how we relate to people, or have you not seen that connection?
Yeah, I think, well, one of the biggest ones is if people are not eating, they've run social experiments to sort of like watch how people's decision making changed as they got closer to the lunch hour or as they got closer to dinner or like the end of the day. I think they ran this both in courtrooms making parole decisions, and they also ran it, I think, around medical errors in surgeries. And so I think one big takeaway is it's worth thinking about like nourishing your brain so it has fuel. Now, if you've trained yourself, if you are a time restricted eater and you know how to eat one meal a day, great. Like, your system.
The habit,
I think the bigger issue is people get off a system,
right.
And then they're asking their body and their brain to perform at a level that it is not being fueled for. So, for example, like if our blood sugar is dropping really low, because maybe we ate like something super sugary because we grabbed something out of the vending machine and now we're kind of crashing because, our body put out a whole bunch of insulin and there's that. Then, you're definitely like, that's when you get like the hangry, like where you're just both annoyed and hungry and uncomfortable all at the same time. So, I often recommend, just when things are getting busy, finding a really simple way to make a plan for yourself. And that doesn't have to be like perfect home cooked meals packaged in, Ziplocs and Tupperwares. Like sometimes it's like Greek yogurt might be your go-to. If you're like, I need protein, it has some sugar, it has some protein, has a little bit of fat in it. It is portable. And, if I'm going from getting no lunch to like eating 2 of those, like that's a leg up. So by the way, I have no ties to the yogurt industry, but that's kind of one of those foods that I have certainly used in that way if things have gotten busy. So like have a plan with portable stuff that keeps you closer to norm when things get really busy.
And so I guess we are getting kind of close to needing to wrap up, but are there any other areas that you see where, executives just approach the high performance thing in the wrong way, or maybe even some myths they might have about it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. We've talked about a number of them. Let's see. One of the last things, and again, this is it's both for leaders, but it's also for their teams. So it's worth thinking at both of those levels. Another big issue that comes up with us in our work is like disengagement. We like the Gallup polls show that like our workforce is less engaged than would be optimal. And I think a lot of that often has to do with the fact that we might be stagnating in some ways, or just that we don't always have opportunities for growth or visibility. And these are things to think about. And even at the executive level, like thinking about how we are basically cultivating power for ourselves, how we are increasing our ability to have some control over what happens to us. And this again goes to our teams as well, becomes a really important theme. And so this is a principle of performance, which I call loosely cultivating power.
Okay.
And like within that, there's a bunch of different things we can think about, both for ourselves, but also for our teams. So one of those pieces is opportunities for growth or skill development. And sometimes what happens for executives they are thinking about it for their teams, potentially, like they're developing their teams, they're trying to create a deep bench, but they forget about it for themselves. So that's thing number one, is that, again, there is change that is always happening. And again, we often feel most capable when we are in motion, we are growing and learning new things we might need to cope with the new futures that are coming down the track. So that's one form, but another form is often around network and or visibility. So one of the interesting things about performance is that there's the results we produce, the concrete numbers or the growth or whatever is there. But there's also how much do other people perceive that performance? And it turns out in areas where performance is less easy to objectively measure, like let's just say athletics, right? It's usually pretty clear who won Wimbledon or something like that. But often in workplaces, it is not as clear. And in those environments, it becomes very important to make sure that the network around you perceives the results you're actually producing. And this is also true for your team as well. But I bring that up because it often gets missed. Often we think, oh no, if I'm doing great work, people will know. Like the people in the chain above me will just know that. And so there is an art to making it visible in a way that is not, that super annoying, like person who's always self-promoting in a way that just makes us all like wince. There is an authentic way to create visibility for yourself, and finding what that looks like for you, it can be an important step. And so again, for different people, that looks differently, but looking for those opportunities of when you can talk about and showcase your team and what you're producing is actually an equally important piece of the performance, not just the producing of the results. And so that's another piece of cultivating power for yourself, and just how that again ties into your engagement and growth in the workplace.
Oh, excellent. Well, Carla, this has been a really fun conversation. Would love to know what 3 things you want to leave top of mind with our audience are.
Yeah, well, we covered a lot of ground. And so I'm thinking I just want to to recap. Basically, I think 3 big areas that leaders can always be thinking about are, number 1, clarity. Are we clear on the objectives, and have we really focused our priorities, and have we communicated that, both up and down the chain? And then I think the second piece is just really about, again, how can we combat fear of uncertainty or discomfort with uncertainty in the workplace, and both for ourselves to get more comfortable with it, but also helping our teams train and build that muscle so that as change comes down, they're ready for that. So the idea of just, can we relish uncertainty and run good experiments as a way to practice that? And then I think the third thing is just really around combating disengagement by providing growth opportunities for visibility, so that we don't get bored and stagnate. And that goes as much for our teams as it actually does for ourselves as leaders. So I think those are the 3 big takeaways.
All right. And where can folks get to know you? Get to know more about what you do or get in contact with you?
Yeah. Great place. If you're just kind of interested in performance science and following along on that conversation, LinkedIn is a great place to find me. And I'm happy to connect, but send me a message so I know where you encountered me. And but I post all the conversations I'm in and any content I'm producing on LinkedIn. And then if you are interested to hear more about coaching and my practice, my website's a great resource for that. So that's at www.thaxa.com, THAXA. And there's also a place to message me on this site if you are interested in talking very specifically about coaching engagement.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
You are very welcome, Jenna. Thank you for having me.
And to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.